Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're talking about the Battle of Aleppo that's unfolding just as political talks seem to be floundering. With us is Emma Suleiman, Syrian activist. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to former UN General Dominique Trinquant. Julian Barnes-Dacey of the European Council on Foreign Relations. And joining us from Ankara, Bilal Sambur, who heads the CESA Institute think tank. Just before the break, we were talking about the one-way traffic at the border with Turkey. Aid convoys going into Syria, but the displaced, they are not coming out. France 24's Sophie Nivelle-Cardinal reports.
This truck is carrying materials to build tents. Food is also brought in. For the ambulances and the trucks bringing in humanitarian aid, the border is open. In the past days, there have been many going in and out.
If the objective is to force people out of their homes, we might not have enough resources because the targeted areas are very populated.
There are no less than 8 camps for IDPs on the Syrian side of the border. Another one is now being set up for those who fled their homes to escape the military offensive in northern Syria. On the Turkish side of the border, Syrians are worried for their loved ones, worried and angry.
There are more than 60,000 people, women and children. They have managed to escape the bombs and now they are freezing to death. Let them in. We don't understand what you're doing.
The Russian airstrikes have triggered this situation. The international community can stop this, but there's no will to do so.
Because of the military offensive in northern Syria, more people are expected to come to reach the Turkish border in order to survive. Now, Turkey is expecting to have soon more than 100,000 people massed at its border.
Julian Barnes-Dacey, should Turkey open the border the way the UN is asking?
I think it's urgent that Turkey opens the border and allows these refugees respite. I mean, the areas that they're under risk being areas of new violence. So there's an urgent need. But I think the question is, if the West is telling them to do that, it needs to stop telling Turkey at the same time, we'll close your western borders so that refugees don't come to Europe. There's this hypocrisy going on whereby the Europeans in particular are saying to the Turks, open up your borders, how can you let this happen? Oh, but shut your borders at the same time so they don't come our way. So, yes, Turkey needs to open its borders, but it needs much more assistance in that respect, and it needs Europe in particular to step up with taking some of these refugees itself.
All right, it is a tricky one, and in the company of the German Chancellor on Monday, Turkey's Prime Minister alluded to how these days Turkey's problems are indeed Europe's problems when it comes to refugees.
We will take them in when necessary. We have expressed our stance on this matter clearly, but nobody should excuse or tolerate Russian airstrikes that are clearly an ethnic massacre with the argument that Turkey will accept Syrian refugees in any case. Nobody should expect Turkey to take all the burden.
Bilal Sambur, why is the border closed?
At the moment, Turkey so far followed open door policy regarding the refugee issue, but the recent development show that Turkey start to change its policy. Now Turkey said that I can't bear this burden alone. This is not Syrian war, is not my war, and refugee problem is not my problem. Syrian war at the same time, it is a European war. And it invites Europe and NATO to involve and intervene to this situation. The recent development shows that Turkey and Germany invite NATO to intervene this refugee crisis. So inviting NATO
intervene in patrolling the waters between Turkey, intervene in patrolling the waters between Turkey and Greece, not intervene at the border with Syria.
Well, I mean, if you just think in a local level, I mean, it is a crisis between Turkey and Greece, or stopping people not to go to Greece and from Greece to Europe. You can't solve this problem because the source of this problem does not start from Turkey to the Greece. It starts from Syria to the Turkey and the rest. So you must stop. You must find a solution at the source of this problem, not at the later stage of the problem. That is the argument of Turkish government and Turkish public is expressing.
Dominique Tranco, whether we like it or not, Syria is Europe's problem, all of Europe's problem?
Well, I think it's very interesting to see that Turkey foreign policy for the last year has been always to go back to the Ottoman Empire and to show that they've got their influence in the region, and specifically in Syria.
But they have 2.7 million refugees on their soil.
Hold on a minute. And they decided to directly say that the Syrian government must change. So they were part of the crisis.
Sorry, sir, can I say something?
Yes, but please wait. Then the European country now providing 3 billion euro to the government of Turkey and say we open the door to discuss to come back in Europe and all that. So I think that you've got the strange way of acting in a crisis, and when the crisis is too bad, then to say it's not my problem, it's the problem of Europe. So I think it's a strange way to look at the crisis in the region.
But Syria was never Europe crisis until the refugee crisis came. This is when people started to learn what was going on about Syria when the refugee influx came in Europe, and I believe the refugee problem is a huge problem today, and that we are nowhere near any solution, because if Assad is winning, more refugees will still come. True that now Turkey, this is temporary. He will not let them go in, but eventually you cannot stop people from fleeing. People will not go back to Syria, will not go back under Assad or Russia, because they know that they are going to die. So they will go to Turkey and will still manage to come to Europe and other ways. You cannot really oppress the people. You're exterminating a nation today, and you have been doing this for the last 5 years by not helping them. It is Syria. It is the world problem today, and as long as they stay undecided, no solution is on the ground. And welcome to the Syrian reality today.
But Bilal Sambour, is it rich on the part of the Turks, whose president made it almost a personal obsession getting rid of Assad, to now say that, well, this is Europe's problem?
Well, first of all, I would like to make a few points. The first point is just describing Turkish foreign policy as the manifestation of Ottomanism, and then evaluating Syrian refugee crisis is an ideological evaluation. It is not something right. The second thing is, this is what we are facing is not an ideological problem, or is not a matter of Ottomanism. It is a practical, a real concrete problem. And Turkey at the moment hosts more than 2 million people. And so far, international community didn't help Turkey too much about helping these refugee people. And at the moment, just European Union and Germany promised Turkey to give around 3 billion euro, but so far Turkey didn't receive this money. So still it is at the process. How this money is going to be used, in which project it is going to be used. So Turkey is, we could say that the most difficult position. Turkey is in a very, very difficult position, and we can't just blame our president. We can't say that President Erdogan has a personal problem with Assad. That is why Turkey is so much involved in this problem. This is not a matter of personal. It is a matter of our national security, regional security, and at the same time, this is the security of Europe and the security of the world.
Lots of reactions coming in. This one on Facebook. The West should support efficient and democratic forces on the ground and reach an agreement with the Syrian government. Turkey spreads oil on the fire, supports Islamists, and blackmails Europe with refugees. Suspension from NATO is an option. Julian Barnes-Dacey, what's your take on that opinion and on the visit of Angela Merkel on Monday to Ankara?
Well, I think Merkel was there purely on the refugee front. That's her big political concern at home, and she's trying to, like much of Europe is at the moment, trying to buy a deal with the Turks where we throw them money and they agree to stop the refugee flow. In terms of Turkey's role in the conflict, I mean, I think they have clearly been a direct antagonist in supporting the opposition. They have clearly played a very fundamentally important role in terms of helping the opposition getting arms in. They've seen it from a moral perspective. They've seen it from a political perspective. They are stuck, much as the Saudis are stuck, in a zero-sum logic where they don't feel they can get out without the removal of Assad, and that's not an option for the moment.
All right. Right now, Turkey's ambassador, the U.S. ambassador in Ankara has been summoned. This after a State Department spokesperson said that the U.S. does not see the Kurdish militant PYD group as a terrorist organization. That's sparking fury in the Turkish capital this Tuesday. At this point in time, it seems as though how bad are the relations between the U.S. and Turkey on this?
Well, I mean, there's a huge rift there because for Turkey, the biggest problem coming out of, or one of the biggest problems coming out of the Syria crisis today is the empowerment of the Kurds. For the U.S., the Kurds have emerged as the only reliable partner on the ground who are able to fight ISIS, who are seen to be united, moderate, efficient. The Americans look at the Turks and see them as having supported extremist forces. They look at the likes of Al-Qaeda-affiliated the Jabhat al-Nusra, and they see a Turkish hand over that. They look at Salafists linked to Ahrar al-Sham, and they see a Turkish hand over that. Because, I mean, there's a strong view in Washington that Turkey has fundamentally misplayed this. You need to rely on the Turks.
So does this push John Kerry and the Obama administration into the arms of the Russians? Because the two of them, we've seen all those photo ops of them together in Vienna, in Geneva, pushing to get both sides to.
I think there's probably more convergence in some ways between Russia and the US than between Turkey and the US. The Turks are still intent on victory in Syria, whereas the Americans would be prepared to work with the Russians for some kind of political deal that probably doesn't see the opposition emerge on top.
All right. You were saying in part one of our discussion, General Tankal, that for the U.S., their beef is Iraq. They're leaving Syria to the others. However, that's not entirely true. The monitoring group Stratfor, a few weeks ago, coming out with some satellite imagery showing that the U.S. is helping Kurdish fighters. We can see those images now. Extend an airbase all the way in the northeastern corner of Syria. So the Americans are present on the ground in Syria, although we don't talk about it much.
No, I think that really their focus is in Iraq because they've got an history with Iraq.
But what's your reaction to this?
No, but of course, they've got to play a role in that. They are probably, previously they provided weapons and I think $500 million to the opposition in Syria, which in fact this opposition changed camp and provided the weapons to the jihadists of.
Did they really provide 500? I mean,
yes,
I
billion.
I hear numbers. Yeah. I never see anything. I mean, I work with the Syrian opposition. I work with the NGOs on the ground, and I know none of the money goes.
I'm not sure that the NGO received the weapons. But the opposition.
Other. I mean.
There's been a strong.
These figures were provided by the U.S. government,
and that's a public program. There's been a covert CIA program.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
It's been valued at least $2 billion in terms of providing arms to the opposition. The problem is, from the opposition's perspective, is that has not been enough because the regime has been getting so much more because the likes of the Russians and the Iranians are committed to the end behind the regime in a way that the US is not prepared to go with the opposition because of doubts about where the country is going to go under them, because of doubts about extremists and so on and so forth. But the US has been a direct actor in this conflict militarily for a long time.
Okay.
Emma Suleiman, on this point, what would you like to see happen when those international leaders meet Thursday in Munich?
I would like to see an agreement. First, I would like. Yeah, this is impossible. You cannot see an agreement, but I mean, we would like to see we hope to see an agreement on the humanitarian front first, because this is the biggest. I mean, it's a disaster. It's a humanitarian disaster today in Syria, and I think Aleppo soon will become a new Madaya on a larger scale. First, second, would like to see a bit of more. I mean, I doubt there'll be any pressure against Russia, but they should be minimum pressure just to stop the bombardment. Over 300 airstrike in 48 hours on Aleppo alone, for God's sake. And no one can tell the Russians to stop. There are civilians in there. I know nothing will come. They're going to push for the talk, to proceed the talk in Geneva on the end of the month, but I don't think it will happen. I don't think anybody is willing to or is serious to continue the talk.
We can see here a map of, in the past week, Russian bombardments, and all right, there was a little bit of bombing around Raqqa, but most of the other...
Daesh. Nobody touched Daesh. Nobody touched ISIS. Their focus...
This is Daesh.
There is because Syrian government forces are there, but and they're protecting the Syrian government forces.
But let's look at that.
But at this point in time, General Trinquant, when you see Russia flexing its muscle these days in Crimea again, military maneuvers off of Sevastopol, is the West going into these talks in Munich in a position of weakness?
No, I think we really have to keep away the tension in the east. But in Syria, really, they've got a strategy. We like it or not, they've got a strategy.
Well, we can disconnect what's going on in Ukraine with what's going on in Syria?
I mean, in Syria, this is an ally. They want to support a government because they don't know what will be if this government fails. That's their strategy. You like it or not, they've got a strategy.
Yes,
in front of them, there is no strategy. That's the problem.
Yeah, but I think the Russians are getting empowered now on the international level. They're playing a global role, and I don't think their aim is Syria. Their aim is much larger, to negotiate. They have a better negotiation factors today to negotiate on Ukraine and Georgia and other places. I don't think Syria is separated from the East in this case.
Julian Barnes-Dacey, can you separate the two? And is Russia an ally when it comes to Syria?
I think the two are separate. I don't see people trading between the two. I don't think that's been brought on the agenda. The Russians are central to what's happening in Syria. They've intervened. There's no getting around that. If we want any kind of solution
but the thaw in relations over Ukraine has been coupled with the Russian intervention in Syria. But it's not a coincidence.
But if we want to get over the crisis in Syria, we will have to work with the Russians. There is no way around that. The Russians have intervene militarily. They are dominant on the ground. They are prepared to invest in a manner militarily that the West is not prepared. If the West wants to be involved, if the West wants to deal with its own concerns of extremism, refugees, not to mention the huge humanitarian crisis, it has to work with the Russians. It has to find some kind of solution, because we're not prepared to go to war with Russia in Syria. That's the alternative. You either decide to fight the Russians in Syria, which we can't do, or you have to strike a deal. And that deal is probably not going to be one that we like.
And what do you do about Syria's Sunnis? And that's who Turkey and Saudi Arabia and the likes are supporting. And they are the largest group inside of Syria, and they're the ones left out in the cold so far.
Well, the only sustainable future for Syria is a deal that gives them something. I think the most likely solution is some kind of devolving of power, both in terms of powers away from the presidency towards the prime minister and government, but probably more importantly, away from Damascus, a model that is mirrored in the likes of Lebanon and Iraq, where effectively the different regions, the Sunni regions, the Kurdish regions, the Alawite along the coast, are given a degree of autonomy so that they can run their own show. I don't see any other way. The Sunnis are not going to be empowered in the short term to run Syria. I think that's a reality we have to face.
Not on the long run, and I don't think the Sunnis are coming back to Syria.
But the other thing is, there are lots of Sunnis who support the regime. Let's not frame this in purely sectarian terms. I mean, one of the reasons that Aleppo is still with the regime, one of the reasons that Damascus is still with the regime, is that there's a large Sunni middle class that support them. So it's very dangerous to frame this in purely sectarian terms. The regime has a strong domestic support base, which goes across sects, and you have to deal with that reality as well. Of course, you have to deal with the Sunnis in Raqqa and the north of the country and so on and so forth. And that's a dilemma going forward. And the regime and the Russians are going to have to incorporate that in some kind of power-sharing system if they are to survive. In a best-case scenario, you get rid of Assad and you can try and remodel something.
I don't see this happening. I mean, from what I've seen, I don't see this happening. I see Assad winning.
All right. Earlier we had a viewer showing tough love for the Turks. Now we have on Twitter one viewer, one for Ukraine, saying Russia must be excluded from the UN Security Council already because of the annexation of Crimea and the violation of the Budapest Memo, or you don't stop it. Dominique Trinquant.
It's a joke. I mean, having the Russian out of the Security Council is simply a joke. You need to discuss with the people. I've been a long time around at the Security Council. You've got to have all the people inside the Security Council to be able to talk to them. It's not putting them outside that will solve the problem. So I think you're talking about Crimea. Who is talking about South Sudan, about Kosovo? That's what the Russians are saying. You are talking about Crimea and what's happening in Kosovo and in South Sudan. You change the border, you create country. Why? We are accused about that. So let's talk about people around the table and not say, I will not talk to you because you've changed Crimea, which was given to Russia in 1954.
All right.
To Ukraine, sorry, 1954.
We're going to leave it there, but I want to thank you, General Dominique Trinquant. I want to thank Emma Suleiman, Julian Barnes-Dacey. I also want to thank Bilal Sambor for joining us from Ankara. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, François. So just taking a look at how the debate topic has been playing out on social media and on news websites. A lot of images of the crowds of people who have been fleeing Aleppo. Misery for 35,000 stuck on the Turkish border, of course, many of them heading towards Turkey, thousands fleeing north of Aleppo towards the Turkish border, and indeed reports in several media that up to 80% of those displaced crowds are women and children, and of course all of the political commentary that has followed it, with Donald Tusk speaking on behalf of the EU, blaming Russia for a new hike in refugee flows. Angela Merkel yesterday also speaking about how appalled she was by the suffering in Syria, which was quickly met with a response from the Kremlin, rejecting this criticism over the Syrian bombings.
Let me ask Julian Barnes-Dacey about that, because Angela Merkel, who's been one of the brokers, you know, for these Ukraine talks, were you surprised at how blunt she was in pointing the finger at Russia on Monday?
Perhaps surprised, but I think that's been the line that has been very common. The Russians clearly intensified their strikes around Aleppo as the talks were going on, so I don't think it was necessarily out of nowhere that she made those comments.
So I think tensions rising across the board, and indeed in the Russian press, they have been looking at these tensions and the possibility, Angela Merkel in Ankara, of course, that between Moscow and Ankara, the tensions could really be getting very, very high indeed. One of the Russian newspapers even speaking about the possibility of open military conflict between the two sides, between Turkey and Russia. Another paper, Kommersant, interviewed several...
Let me ask General Trinquant about that, because I see you shaking your head a little bit about the possibility of there actually being some kind of war between Russia and Turkey. But could there be a misunderstanding, a mistake that leads to an escalation?
Because clearly behind Turkey you've got NATO, and Russia doesn't want to fight NATO. And but I'm more worried about the fact that Turkey can play on that.
So you don't think, like Emma Suleiman, that downing of a Russian fighter jet was a one-off? There could be other incidents like that.
I hope not. But Turkey can play on that. But the Russians have no interest in fighting NATO.
Kommersant, for its part, interviewed François, two experts in this conflict, and they both said, look, after Aleppo, the attempt to take Aleppo back, perhaps Russia should really start to pull back instead of trying to win the war in Syria. They should perhaps convert it to political dividends and sort of start to withdraw instead of getting stuck into a conflict that could get worse and more complicated there's also mentioned that if, for example, Saudi Arabia send ground troops in, that this could potentially lead to a conflict with NATO. So some are speaking about that as a concern or a worry. That is in another Russian newspaper, Vzгляд. I'm sure that's badly pronounced. But anyway, just moving on to one further item of that is doing the rounds of social media, moving away from the geopolitics, François. These are images of a couple who were getting married in Homs, and Nada Meri is the bride, and Hassan Youssef, who is actually a soldier in Bashar al-Assad's forces. And these images were taken against the backdrop of, well, the devastated city of Homs, and indeed a lot of people commenting on that. It seems to have been something that the photographer in question has done on more than one occasion. He has published such images against the backdrop of a destroyed city. And I think the message that these photos were trying to send was life continues and life is stronger than destruction. But I suppose the fact that the army that he is actually fighting for is partly responsible for that destruction is creating a certain amount of
part of the propaganda again.
Right, and indeed the photographer.
And it's not the first time. It's not the first time. They have been doing this for a while.
Right, so controversial series of photographs, but they have been getting a lot of coverage in the press, François.
All right. Many thanks for that, James Creed. And I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24.